with all this anti-DEI rhetoric, with all of these things, how do we manage it? How do we navigate it? How do we ensure we can still recruit and retain staff? How do we manage and protect our reputation and mitigate against risk? And for this session, which is kindly sponsored by Gas Networks Ireland, we have moderating the panel our own Luke McLoughlin, who is the Head of Operations from Pride at Work, Siobhán McKenna, ED&I Lead from the Department of Public Expenditure, Andrew Campbell-Edie, Communications and Event Manager with the Irish Centre for Diversity, Maeve Richardson from Financial Services Union, and Seán Kelly from Gas Networks Ireland. I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jed, and welcome to my lovely panelists that we have here. Just give Maeve a sec. So I suppose we've had a lot of very interesting conversations this morning, and I think this panel is going to tie in quite a lot of elements that we've actually already touched on, and I think even the AI conversation is probably maybe going to come up in here too. So I suppose what I want to start off with is kind of a very kind of broad question, and a bit of a myth-busting question here. So I suppose in a global scale, we've talked about it quite a lot today, but in the US there's a big pushback against D&I initiatives in general. But in an Irish context, is there actually such a thing as illegal DEI practices? Do they actually exist here on the ground? So I'll throw that out to the four of you, if anyone has any kind of thoughts on the matter, because I don't know. I think it's an interesting one, because in the US, the conversation, I suppose, it is very much framed around kind of taking actions to purposely target kind of marginalised groups and to preferentially kind of treat them different. And so there's pushback against that. But here in Ireland, and I suppose in the EU in general, those practices don't actually exist. And we can't positively discriminate here in the Irish kind of workplace. So yeah, I suppose that's kind of where I wanted to get. There's a bit of, I suppose, a lot of noise around this kind of area at the minute. And it can be a bit kind of, I suppose, a bit scary when you're seeing kind of these big, scary words like illegal practices that you think maybe are going to apply to you. So I suppose with that, and I might start actually with yourself, Siobhán. Are there any particularly kind of DEI practices that you kind of really are like big champion of? And I suppose, do you think there's any kind of risk involved in actually carrying out these practices?
There is, if you're doing it properly, I suppose. Hi everybody. It's really good to be here again, see such a full house. So I'm the policy lead for ED&I in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in the Public Sector Workforce Division. So most of my focus is on the civil service and the public sector in terms of ED&I. I suppose the first thing to say is that the environment here is really different to the US. And we're not going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about the US because, but I do hear a lot, particularly online, about how people are DEI hires, or it's affirmative action, or they're only there because they're a woman, or they're brown, or they're this, that, and the other. Affirmative action is illegal in this country, and rightly so. We don't need it. There is an argument for an affirmative action in the US to address the historic effects of slavery and the genocide of the indigenous Americans. They have a very different history to the one that we have. We might want to consider, so the only case that I would see for that really would be around the Irish traveller community. There is a lot of work to be done there to address the historic injustices there. But anyway, what we do in this country is positive action. It's not even positive discrimination. And positive action is just kind of going out to communities who maybe are underrepresented in your workforce. Talking to local schools, community groups, running information sessions, running recruitment sessions, kind of bringing people positively acting towards them to engage. So, and if we want our community, if we want our workforces to represent the changing nature of Ireland, we actually have to be proactive. We have to go out to the communities who aren't in our workforces and say, Have you looked at the public sector? Have you looked at the financial services? Because they will be reluctant to come to us if they don't think it's a space that they belong in. So I'm really in favour of going to where people are and meeting them there and bringing them in.
And I think actually that point of kind of making sure that people know that you are kind of encouraging, say, in a job application process, applications from a wide variety of kind of backgrounds and lived identities. I think Aisling actually mentioned earlier that they list 11 or 12 specific kind of communities that they would like to work with in their kind of job applications. And I think that actually is very important. And we're not saying, oh, we will only look at people from this particular list, but it's letting kind of people know that if you are from one of these communities, that this is not going to be a brick wall, and this is going to be a receptive kind of place, obviously based on merit, based on your CV, your application. So I think that's an important piece too. I think that comes down to communication overall. And actually, I might hit Seán with this one, just being the fact that you're from not so much a corporate setting, but you're more kind of that corporate kind of workplace, as opposed to, I suppose, kind of the others here on the panel. So from that communication standpoint, do you think that there's a big kind of need to up our game in terms of how we are actually speaking to people?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, we're a semi-state commercial company. So I would say for ourselves, it's how we represent ourselves to the market, firstly, in terms of what we do and how we do it. And equally from a recruitment perspective, how we communicate that message out to people to say, yes, we're a good employer, but we're safe, we're inclusive, and everybody is welcome. We've got a very diverse workforce. People would probably look at Gas Networks Ireland and go, traditionally male, white, middle age. Historically, yes, but in the last number of years that has, changed consistently, and our workforce is completely different as would be 40 years ago. So we're very open, we're very inclusive, but I think what you have to do is how you communicate that message. You don't want to flood the market either and say, oh God, we do this, this, and this, we're brilliant. You need to be realistic, you need to be measured, show what you can do, show value, show that you're hiring the right people, that it is inclusive, it's diverse workforce, and everybody is welcome, and it's safe, most important. You can come to work and you can be your true self. And I think that's the key message with ourselves when we go out there and look to hire staff, and we promote that really, really well, and especially with Gen Z. And I think the difference with Gen Z and say somebody of my age, they're much more willing to ask those challenging questions of an employer. Like, do you do this? Do you do that? Where maybe somebody of my generation wouldn't ask those questions. So I think by them looking at what we do on our website, by sponsoring events like this is invaluable to us to say, look, come work with us. It's a safe environment. Not everybody has that privilege, and a lot of companies are rolling back. We're driving forward, and I think that's probably the key differentiator, especially in a market that's so full employment.
Yeah, and I think the piece there of we're not pulling back, we are taking a stand, and we're kind of putting more of our kind of, I suppose, our money where our mouth is. And even today, like coming and kind of sponsoring this session, it's not something that possibly would have happened in prior years, but that, I suppose, it's a testament to the work that is actually going on kind of behind the scenes. I feel I might hear Andrew with this now as well, just from that communication piece. Because I suppose you are dealing with, like the same as ourselves, with quite a number of different organisations, so you're seeing kind of, I suppose, multiple viewpoints on this. So yeah, I think I'd be very interested to have your thoughts.
Yeah, I was jumping in a bit to jump in then, and I would say, speaking for the Irish Centre for the Diversity, we work with corporates, so organisations of all sectors and all sizes. And we support them to create the cultural change in their workplaces that brings about environments where everybody's supported to thrive, basically, and feel a sense of belonging. I know we're not going to talk about America in this whole session, but since the changes happened over there, we've seen our interest in D&I, and we've seen it double, because what we've noticed is that companies are still because they've got the SDGs and the European directives that are forcing them to do it, and things like the public sector obligation, is it, or charter, that kind of enshrines EDI work within their operations. We're seeing companies that they're not necessarily scaling back, that yes, some are changing it and evolving it and relabeling it, but it's still there. So it's called sustainability, it can be called wellness and various other things, which is not an issue because it's changed since the whole area came about. It's always changed. It started off as equal opportunities, certainly in the UK. I don't know what it was called here, and then it became equal rights and things like that. So, and then it became EDI, and now it's called EDI, DEI, and various other different other things. But to the point of what we're seeing at the moment, we're seeing companies that are sticking with it are seeing the opportunity to really double down on what they do. And that kind of makes true one of the things that we advocate for, is that people should be being loud and proud about their EDI work through things like our Investors in Diversity accreditation. Because we always say that people, prospective recruits shouldn't have to go looking and ask questions about what the EDI credentials are. You know, your potential recruits have those as their own values, and they're looking for companies that reflect those values. So if somebody's maybe questioning or maybe doesn't have the chutzpah to just kind of full out ask those questions, they shouldn't actually have to. They should know from the website, they should know from the events that you sponsor, like things like this. They should know from accreditations, Better Places to Work, our own Investors in Diversity, that those values are shared, and they have those cultures that they will feel comfortable in, that align with their values as well. So yeah, and it's great to see that doubling down, because it really kind of sets the tone that people are getting the message, and people are seeing the value of EDI, and also seeing the competitive advantage of it. If people are reading reports about one company that's going against the tide and scaling back, other people in that sector will see, okay, well, if we make the noise that we're doubling down and we are active in that area, that immediately makes them a great location for people to join. And then not just people to join. I know we're talking about recruitment and retention, but it's also people.
It's a marketing tactic as well.
It's marketing, and it's also, you're attracting customers as well. So it has commercial value as well. It's not just recruitment and retention. It's also, it makes business sense to do it.
Yeah, completely. But I suppose just yourself and Seán have both hit on kind of younger kind of queer workers, and how they are kind of maybe more confident or more assured that they're going to go in and ask these questions. They're going to have their kind of their strong kind of moral kind of ethical stance. But I suppose that in one sense is great, but we then know, I suppose, even from earlier on with Caroline from Belong To, that kind of we still have very high levels of kind of depression, anxiety, kind of suicide ideation with young people. So both of these kind of factors are kind of, I suppose, at heads. So we do have a big push in terms of, we want kind of that fairness, that equality, but we're still having kind of, young people are still battling with the kind of their sense of self and their sense of security out there in the world. So that is kind of just something that sparked with me. And it comes back to that communication piece. So if we are just shouting from the rooftops that we are an inclusive employer, that we are kind of getting our Pride at Work certified partnership, or our kind of Investors in Diversity awards, or we are explicitly saying that we are kind of, we are encouraging applications, say from a traveller background, all of these things go towards kind of, I suppose, stopping that kind of negative thought space and building that confidence to then kind of go a bit forward. But I want to kind of get to yourself there, Maeve, and just see if there's kind of anything you'd like to kind of say from the kind of the Youth Council perspective, and how the kind of landscape for the kind of young queer workers is kind of looking.
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name is Maeve Richardson. I'm a digital organiser at the Financial Services Union, which is a union for people largely in banking, financial services, tech. I also sit on the Irish Congress of Trade Unions Youth Committee, so I work with lots of other young people across the trade union movement. And prior to having a career in the trade union movement, I was a students' union officer with the Union of Students in Ireland as the Equality and Citizenship Officer, which was tremendous. But over particularly the 2020s, which have been so turbulent, we've seen sort of these pushbacks, not only from America, but just in wider society, the rising of the far right. For example, in 2022, seeing the far right attack libraries, particularly in Cork, and people having to come together and protest to show that they are not the majority. For young queer workers, there's enough challenges that we're facing around housing, around cost of living. We're watching so many of our peers leave the country, over 60,000 left between 2022 and 2023, according to CSO. And a National Youth Council of Ireland survey indicated that 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds are considering leaving the country in the next 4 years. So there's enough challenges facing young people, and choosing to stay here amongst everything like that is already a challenge. The last thing you need is to feel discriminated against in the workplace. It takes real bravery to be who you are, and a workplace should recognise that bravery and uplift it. And that's something the trade union movement has done over the years. You know, it's amazing being an event like this, considering the first National Gay Conference didn't happen until 1982, and there wasn't any real laws protecting LGBT people at that point. There was nothing, no frameworks. We didn't get sexuality included into the Unfair Dismissals Act until 1983. And that was largely from the trade union movement and younger workers who got involved in organisations and trade unions and saw the ability to use these structures to give power to LGBT people in the workplace. So for young LGBT people, I would be looking at how you can ensure that you can protect your rights in the workplace and we aren't taking things we have for granted. You know, a lot of you here are definitely in workplaces that support you bringing yourself to work, and you probably have employee resource groups that are supporting you, but not every workplace has that guarantee, which is why it's so important to be part of something outside the workplace that's autonomous, that can work to protect what you have in the workplace. We should never take any of this for granted. Like, so many of our employment laws are at the bare minimum. Like, every single time there's a storm in Ireland, you have the question of, is my boss going to stay open or closed? Because it's at the discretion of the employer, rather than, you know, this is a blanket rule. If it's 10 inches of snow, everything's shut down. But where you notice that this is less of an issue, for example, is, again, in unionised workplaces with staff associations, because you have an ability to have a say in the workplace. You can rely on not only your strength as an individual, but on group strength. And that's what young people need to be looking at, not taking things for granted and looking for their community in the workplace when they're entering the workplace. And, you know, definitely looking out for the culture within the workplace and doing their research before they get there. And being brave and asking questions in interviews, in inductions of what supports are there for them. And to look at those supports outside the workplace through organisations like LGBT Ireland, like trade unions, and keeping yourself safe. And it's quite nerve-wracking for a young person. You know, the jobs market is always turbulent. Rental market, the last thing you need is your gender and sexuality to come up and get in the way of you getting through your career.
I think it's important to remember that workplaces can be safe spaces for a lot of people. And Luke, you were talking about earlier about referring to the Belong To statistics about suicide ideation and things like that. It's important to remember that workplaces can be psychologically and physically safe spaces for people, for younger workers, for older workers that might not be out for a whole host of reasons. And I think it came through in through COVID about, you know, domestic abuse figures rising. The same thing can happen when, you know, when your workers who may not have the chutzpah to hold themselves or not be victimized, you know, when they leave the workplace, they then, if they're not supported in the workplace, it's the same they're getting the same risks that they are getting outside. So it's important to make sure that those people who may be vulnerable, who may not even have disclosed that they're LGBTQ+, just make sure that the culture is there, that the supports are there, that the ERGs are there, that the allies are there, that it's just somewhere, it can be a place of sanctuary for them, not just in terms of making them more productive, but just harnessing and nurturing the talent, really, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do, in a way, I can understand what Seán was saying as well, how when I think back to even when I was, say, in my early 20s, like kind of entering the job market, it wasn't that long ago, but it was still a very different, it was still a very different landscape. It was pre-marriage equality. I was also, I suppose, living in the West, so I have a very, I suppose, a different kind of I suppose, upbringing in sort of that sense. But I was like, I'd always have been apprehensive kind of how I would be kind of perceived, whatever way that may be, predominantly because I would have been working in, say, in finance, so a lot of it was kind of heterosexual, kind of, it was generally always kind of a white cis man on the other side of the table. So yeah, I just think that kind of, that evolution now, and the fact that the kind of the youth are thankfully, I suppose, standing strong, hopefully because of kind of touching on what Andrew was saying, that kind of, yes, society is actually has become more of that safe space, and hopefully kind of our workplaces are too. But I suppose how do we kind of make that even better? How do we kind of make that not the ideal, but just the standard?
Yeah, like, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade here, but I'm gonna. Matrix Recruitment, for the first time, asked last year about a rise of hard, and I now call them hard right, because they're no longer far right. They're not out there on the fringe anymore. They asked about the rise of hard right sentiment in the workplace, and 1 in 4 people had seen it. And it's in and around that misinformation, that disinformation, not calling it out. It is not the homophobia and the racism and sexism of the 80s and 90s. It's much more subtle, people are much smarter about it, it's driven by social media as well. I have also, and it's quite depressing, have had to accept that the next generation coming through are not immune to this either. The kid, the child that was beaten up in Waterford, the Indian girl, young teenagers. The misogyny that seems to be coming through, and I know who to blame for that. I'm not going to name them because I don't need any more publicity. The online manosphere, which is, and our boys are a bit lost. They need to recalibrate and find their roles, and I get all of that. But I am done saying, oh, the next generation are going to solve this. We're through the door, it's fine. So those young people who are apprehensive of coming into the workplace will still have to deal with what possibly you had to deal with, or what I had to deal with when we were entering the workplace. So this work doesn't stop, it evolves and it progresses, and you can't actually take your foot off the pedal.
Yeah,
the gains that we have made can evaporate. We've seen that in the States. All those public sector workers who join, civil and public service jobs because they're permanent and pensionable, they can make a difference, gone. They don't seem to have any employment law in the US though. But and so I, getting a bit older, getting a bit wiser, and I'm just like, and I have 3 young kids. I had to call their after school club twice last year because people were using racist language around them. And it's so depressing. I was so thrilled that their school experience was going to be so different to mine. But then I find myself having to do what my mother had to do 40 years ago when I was in school. And so we know those forces out there that would divide and conquer, that would have you blame the brown person instead of the structures in society that aren't benefiting any of us, or the gay person, or the trans person. And so we need to keep going with this. It will evolve. Some people will work in American companies where they have to keep their head down for a few years. People will still do it. We will still collect data. We will still know who's in our workforce. We will reframe things through more of a risk lens or something like that. We will do less outward stuff. We will do more inward stuff. And to be honest, I'm okay with that. If we're actually doing quietly structural change in the background and we've scrapped the cupcakes for pride, I'm fine with that. This is an area of business that will evolve like every other business. And so we just need to keep making those incremental changes.
Yeah, definitely. And And I think, I suppose, if we have real, like, tangible benefits and practices actually happening in the background, the Pride cupcakes are nice to have. They're kind of an added extra, and they mean nothing if we don't have kind of the policies to back it up and the actual kind of infrastructure built in.
And I'm all for safe spaces, but I'm wary about that because the world is not a safe space. If you're trans, or if you're black, or if you're migrant background, or if you're visibly, it isn't. Public transport, doctors, whatever it is, it's not as safe as we would like it to be. And the assumption that work is an automatic safe space and you can just be yourself there, I also think is a bit of a myth as well, because we're human and there's bullies and racists and people all around. Like, you know, it's not going to go away. So I just need us to be careful about some of the assumptions we're making about the workplace that we're creating, what is realistically safe, and what if your whole self is a misogynist or a racist? Are we still telling them, bring your whole self to work? So we just need to watch that language. We need to be valued and respected. I don't need to belong to my workplace. I need to be valued and respected.
Yeah, actually, that's very good. No, that's a very powerful closing line there.
But those changes, everything that Siobhán's just said, take leadership, and it's so pleasing to see so many leaders and people that can drive change, those policies, those structural changes, those behind-the-scenes work in the room today. So congratulations to you all. But the message that it's up to you guys to, I shouldn't use gendered language, it's up to you people to take these messages back to your workplaces and talk about the valuing and respecting and the safe spaces. Safer spaces. You know, because without leadership on board and knowing that they're doing it for everybody in the organisation and the wider society, it's just change it's just not gonna come. God, that sounds like a speech.
I just might touch on what Siobhán said around, you know, we can't just wait for the next generation to save us, and it's really not looking that way. But I think we as people who are currently in the workplace and are largely of voting age, we have a duty to fight to maintain the fights that we've had and the wins that we've had, and to go further, but also to ensure that we are doing our best to keep things great for the next generation, you know. And younger people are seeing, as my colleague Gareth referred to, what the algorithm is delivering to them, you know, which is often things that they know they'll get sucked into, that are addictive, a lot of far-right rhetoric, blaming minorities, blaming gay people, mocking them. We have a duty to speak up and have regulation around these algorithms. For example, I was in Germany recently, and I decided for the crack to set up a new TikTok account to see what content it would bring me. When I made the account, I identified as a 18-year-old male. Within 4 scrolls, I was being delivered far-right content in German, didn't understand it, but I understood from the imagery what was going on. So we have a duty to ensure that we have DEI education weaved into our education system, that we treat everyone with dignity, that we back up the work of organisations like Shout Out going into schools and ensuring that we are having as much equality coming up the line as possible, that we are fighting learned behaviours from algorithms, and that we're maybe correcting unhealthy behaviour from the home. Because when you go into a school, when you go into university, you see so many different aspects of society, and we need people to, as early in life, know that diversity is okay, and that we need to protect that the right for everyone to be equal in the workplace and within society, and for everyone to feel safe. You know, we've seen organisations like SIP2 calling out for transport police on buses so that everyone feels safe, and that's something we have to maintain. And I think, if anything, as LGBT people, we've learned we never really get what we deserve, but we do get what we fight for. So we need to be doing that with our education system and with our workplaces. And as a trade unionist, I believe the best way of doing that is having an autonomous voice through a trade union in your workplace and fighting for better within the workplace and outside the workplace.
I agree with everything. I think back to Siobhán's point, just in relation to like bringing your true self to work, it is a bit cringy. But I suppose ultimately we spend a lot of our time in work, and these are the relationships that we build with people. And for me, it's about respect and trust. That's ultimately what we go to work for, to do a good job, to get paid. It's not our life, we're there to make a living, that's about it. But ultimately we want to feel safe in work. I'm with Gas Networks 3 years, and I can say the landscape that has changed in the 3 years that I've been there. I'm probably very strong-willed, very outspoken, as my colleagues will say, and I don't take shit. So that's the reality. So I took the chair of the Rainbow Committee, and I have changed it and how we do it. And I think for the younger generation coming in, it's a much better environment. I run the apprenticeship programs, the graduate programs, and the students. And I'm always heartened by the questions that I'm asked. And the first question a lot of people is culture. You know, the younger people are saying, do you have a Rainbow group? So there's all that coming, you know, and I love that. And I think that it's fantastic to see. But I'm not naive enough to know that there's a lot of work to do. There is companies rolling back. I'm very lucky to work for a company that we're driving forward. But I think for ourselves, in pushing that forward, we still need to respect the wider audience. Not everybody's going to come on the journey with us, but my view would be, come to work, respect your colleague. You may not understand the journey they're on, but respect them during those hours of business. That's it.
Yeah, I suppose very, very true. Respect, I suppose, should be the core of what kind of where we're coming from. Everyone deserves to be respected. Everyone should be respected, particularly in a workplace. And I do think it's an interesting kind of change in the language. I don't belong to my workplace. I want to feel valued. But I feel like that.
That's completely. No, but it's our website now after.
Yeah, like that has.
Value, we all want to feel valued, and that's what it comes down to.
I do think language in this space can be challenging. It alienates people.
Absolutely.
Like, lots of people don't want to belong to work. They want to go, do their job, enjoy it, get along, and then leave.
We have a life outside of work.
Yeah, most of
But I suppose we are a lot of kind of what we have been talking about is an evolution of how we are phrasing things. It's how kind of the words that we're using and literally just the phrases. So the sentiment and kind of what we're actually physically going to do is going to be the same, but it's right. How can we meet that person where they are? So we might have kind of, I don't know, our goal, but we might need 5 different ways of saying it depending on who we're speaking to. And I think that communication piece as well is something that kind of maybe needs to be kind of looked at. Not everyone responds the same way. And yeah, if you want to get the most out of kind of people, you want to get the most people on board, you need to try as many angles as I suppose as you can use. Go on, Andrew.
And don't underestimate the ripple of, I know we're talking about communication, but never underestimate the ripple of the impact that you have as a single person in your workplace. You know, as an individual that may be either LGBTQ+ or an ally of that area, the ripple that you can have in the workplace, in your home, with your children, with your friends, with your family. I think somebody said that the marriage equality referendum was won through personal contact rather than kind of dogmatic hitting people over the head with statistics and what have you. It was down to, I'm your hairdresser, or I'm whatever. I can see someone from Lewis here. I'm your Lewis driver. I'm your Gas Networks person. I'm your everyday person. We're everywhere. I'm your everyday person, and I am a person, and I'm just the same as everyone else. I deserve the same respect and value as everyone else. So just don't underestimate the value of the ripples that you have. So yes, there will be an element of people who just don't get it, will never get it. Don't waste your time on them, actually, I would say. But the bell curve that Gareth was talking about earlier, there will be an element of people who are open to engagement, open to education, understanding. I hate the word acceptance because that just seems so...
That's baseline.
Yeah, exactly. Acceptance, but yeah, respect and value.
Yeah, and I suppose I've actually just lost my entire train of thought there.
It all comes back down to respect and value.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So just in terms of, I suppose, organisations that, I suppose, have kind of rolled back or have maybe just stopped kind of shouting from the rooftops what they are doing. Do we have any advice for those organisations? Because I suppose that there may be some members of the audience here today who maybe are from those organisations who actually aren't kind of maybe rolling back, but they're maybe just a bit apprehensive on how they're actually to use their kind of wording or what they can actually do. Would anyone have, I suppose, any advice?
I suppose it depends on what kind of environment you're in. I think the key to it is survival. So we need to get through this phase where these more hard right views are dominating the public discourse and dominating this and the other. So, if you have to roll back or if you have to be less public about it, but you still get to do the work, great. For people out there who have none of those restrictions, they will have to fly the flag for parts of their sectors where maybe there isn't. Like, all of this work can continue internally without that external face. And we are lucky in this country. We have a rake of legislation. We have EU legislation coming down the line as well. We have the EU Pay Transparency Directive next year. And so that is going to have, they're trying to close all the pay gaps with that. Gender first, but I suspect ethnicity and things like that will start to emerge. So we have a robust foundation. So we can't roll back as much as, say, somewhere in the States or that doesn't have that. So, but people will do the bare minimum, and if that's what they need to do for a couple of years to get through it until the attention is diverted, climate crisis or war, whatever it is, fine. But the rest of us need to keep doing it, and we need to keep it on the agenda, and we need to keep talking about it. Because I suspect the harder the jobs market becomes for candidates, so it becomes an employer's market, that is what I thought would impact ED&I in the workplace, because it's always the first step to go. When it's no longer a candidate's market and it's an employer's market, I didn't think it would be the 47th president of the United States, but there you are. So we just need to keep those structures in place. And it's harder to dismantle structures than it is, a Pride event or so, because if they become embedded in your governance and in your reporting structures, it's harder you have to actually have an explicit conversation about no longer reporting on those and why.
And that's, I suppose, not going to be a comfortable conversation.
No, and it shouldn't be.
I was just going to say, I think the hard question there is, you're asking the employer why, and that's not an easy ask either, why. But I suppose in a market where there is full employment, there's opportunities for people to go and look for alternative options. That's the reality. Where that isn't available, sometimes you just do have to roll it back and just bide your time. And I think the key thing, I would say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we have to maintain the energy levels and just keep going and doing the best we can. And that takes a lot out of all of us individually and personally, because, some of us are of a generation, we're looking, oh God, are we rolling back? Are we going so far back, Like, I'm in my mid-40s, I don't want to be going back into the 90s and not being able to declare who I am or live the way I want to live. That's the reality. And go to work and be happy to be working and know that I'm in a safe place. But if an employer is taking away that stuff, you really have to push back and ask the questions. And if you're not happy, it's full employment. Go and look for the job and do your homework.
I will say, just kind of, I suppose, I think maybe what Siobhán was also saying is that's fully possible today, because it's kind of there are kind of more jobs than there are people. But if that is ever to flip, I suppose, if we don't hold fast now, then that unfortunately may not actually be an option in 5-10 years. Sorry, Andrew.
The answer to that, as Siobhán said, is making sure the structures are there and protected. But there's also a piece that says, take the long-term view. Okay, so we've got 4 years to kind of hunker down and roll back. It's not right, it's not okay. I had to get that in. Take the long-term view. If you roll back now, what does that say to your authenticity and to your credibility, not only to the people that are in your organisation already, but to the people that are looking to join later on? If they can't trust you on this, what can they trust you on?
Very, very true. And actually, that is going to be my kind of closing question. To those companies who have rolled back and now they're kind of looking at themselves being like, oh, what have we done? We need to try and make amends. How I suppose, do we have any advice on how they should actually go about kind of bridging that gap? And I suppose laying kind of the foundations for where they actually are.
Deep thought there. Look at
Yeah. Yeah, Siobhán's getting gearing up.
Well, no, like, they'll do what they have to do now, but we don't know where we'll be in 3 years or 5 years or what the economy will like or anything like that. So
there's also an ongoing reputational, I suppose.
Yeah, and the law firms who bent the knee to Trump are starting to see it in the milk round for young lawyers coming out of university now in the US. They are, you know, there's been a drop off in the first 15 and the 3 that bent the knee and things like that. So that is a key consideration. That's your pipeline. You were looking on your website and talking to people who work in the company and going, is that a safe space for gay people? Is it a safe space for neurodiverse people? Is it a safe space for women to progress? And so you know, the employers need to take the long view here. They need to be looking at kids who are leaving school now, then going to go to college and this, that, and the other, or do their apprenticeship. Where are they going to be in 10 years? What is your workforce plan for in 10 years now if you shred your reputation now? And I don't think there's a company out there that wants to do it, but people will take different perspectives and different approaches depending on their sector, depending on what their latitude is from, you know, their corporate overlords. But like, it's 2025. We're just not going back. None of us are going back to the 80s or the 90s or things like that. So the progressive ones, the ones that want to survive, the ones that want the best talent, will have an eye to what they look like in 2035 and not 2025.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Go on, Maeve.
Yeah, like, obviously you'd lose a lot of talent in these circumstances, and there's a lot of trust building that would need to be done in cases of where this has happened, where maybe pride sponsorships have been pulled or internal events aren't getting the support that they used to. So companies would need to do a lot to build that trust again. And, you know, they'd really need to solidify the structures that they have. And just, you know, looking at the situation in America, they are losing lots of talent, and lots of Americans have said they won't even consider applying to these companies because of these DEI rollbacks. But what the advice I give to the workers in there is, if you get a hint that one of these important policies is being rolled back or a support is being rolled back, to look at your colleagues around you, look at your peer group. It's probably not just you who's feeling this way, who's noticed this. Like, you might be in a workplace where you think, I'm probably the only queer person, everyone around me is heterosexual. But like we saw at marriage equality, a lot of people who are heteronormative and everything in between understand the queer struggle and don't want to see that happen in the workplace or in any part of society. But we've learned from this that sometimes these DEI policies, these structures are put in place, like employee resource groups, they aren't guaranteed, they're not permanent, and sometimes they're not what they look like on the outside. You know, we had the Pride cupcakes at one event, but someone's getting away with using slurs in the workplace. We need to have, you know, the structures, the policies in place. And to bang on the same drum again, I recommend joining a trade union so you do have that autonomous voice outside the workplace. When you're in a trade union, you have the ability to have a say, and that policies are negotiated in the workplace. It's not just pay, it is also anything and everything that happens within the workplace. Workers need to have a say. And having something autonomous that gives you the ability to take action if there are things being rolled back, whether it is DEI policies, working from home, which is essential for so many parents, neurodiverse people, and people who want to have a work-life balance. We need to have a place to fight for these things outside the workplace, because an employer, due to our laws, kind of has the ability just to ignore you, while if you're in a union or a staff association, there's a collective bargaining agreement in place, and you have the ability to take action, you know, stop doing work, go on strike, if these extreme things are happening.
Well, thank you all very much. I think we're just coming up to time now, and you're all free to go to lunch. So yeah, enjoy, and thank you all very much.
Great, thank you.